The temperature in Cedar Hill had dropped to 18 degrees by 11 o'clock, and the back roads were glassing over in the way they do in a Tennessee January. Sam Greer was walking Dove because Dove needed a walk. In the dark, she lifted her nose and turned toward a specific yard 4 houses down, the way she turned when she had already decided, and Sam had learned to follow that attention without needing an explanation. The back porch light was on at 11:31. A woman was on the ground. She had been there for 2 hours and 19 minutes. She had called 4 people that night, and only one was coming. He didn't know yet it was him. Dove already did. If you haven't found this channel yet, stay with me through this one. Subscribe, so you're here when the next story comes. Sam Greer had served 2 tours in Helmand Province with the 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, which is the kind of service that does not produce a particular type of person so much as it reveals the type that was already there. He was from Knoxville, had grown up in a house where his father worked long shifts and his mother ran everything else, and had learned early that the people who keep things running are not the people who announce it. They are the people who simply show up, every time, without making the showing up into a statement. He had joined at 19, and he had come home at 24, carrying the standard inventory of things that come home with infantry Marines from Helmand. The weight of specific memories, the specific names of men who did not come back, and a relationship with silence that people who had not been there sometimes misread as distance when it was in fact attention. He was paying attention. He was always paying attention. He had just learned to do it quietly. His squad leader, Staff Sergeant Ray Cobb, had been from Murfreesboro, 20 miles south of Cedar Hill. Ray had been the kind of man who remembered the name of everyone's mother and used it, who could locate, in any room, the person who most needed someone to notice them, and notice them. He was killed in a vehicle ambush on a road outside Sangin in February of 2011, which was a fact Sam had been living with for 14 years in the way you live with facts that have no resolution, not past them, not around them, alongside them, the way you walk alongside a river that is always moving and always the same. Sam visited Ray's mother, Dottie Cobb, twice a year. First Sunday in May, first Sunday in October. He had not missed a visit in 11 years. Dottie Cobb was 78, lived alone in Murfreesboro in the house where Ray had grown up. And when Sam came, she made sweet tea, and they sat on the porch, and she told him things about Ray that Sam hadn't known, and Sam told her things about Ray that she hadn't known. And the exchange between them was the kind that made both people more complete when it ended than when it began. He had moved to Cedar Hill 18 months ago, in part because the rent was manageable, and in part because being 20 miles from Dottie felt like the right proximity. He had a word for what he did on those first Sundays, though he did not use it out loud. He called it showing up. It was the simplest formulation of the thing he had learned from Ray, and lost Ray before he could fully learn, which was that the only adequate response to the knowledge that people are alone is to be present on the specific days when presence is required. Ray had known which days those were by instinct. Sam had to build the practice deliberately. He had been building it for 14 years. Dove had come to him through a VA transition program in Nashville. She was pale fawn, large-framed, Labrador Shepherd cross, with amber eyes that gave her face an expression of continuous and genuine concern for whatever was directly in front of her. She was not an anxious dog. She was an attentive dog, the difference being that anxiety closes a dog inward and attention opens them outward, toward whatever in the immediate environment is most in need of it. She had, in the 18 months since Sam had had her, twice gone still and turned toward something before Sam could identify what she was responding to, and both times Sam had followed her attention and found something that needed finding. He had stopped needing an explanation for how she did this. She did it. That was sufficient. June Mabry had been teaching 3rd grade at Cedar Hill Elementary for 32 years before she retired in 2001, which meant she had had a hand in the foundational education of roughly a third of the adults currently living in Wilson County. She was the kind of teacher that students returned to, who wrote letters to, who brought their own children to meet, who sat beside in church for decades after the desk and the classroom were gone, and the relationship had become simply the relationship of two people who had passed through something important together at a particular time. She had married Lloyd Mabry in 1968, and had been married to him for 46 years, and had found him on a Tuesday afternoon in the garden behind the house, face down in the tomatoes he had been tending, gone from a heart attack that the coroner said had happened fast. She had stood in the garden for a long time before she called anyone. Not from shock. She had been saying goodbye. She understood that this was the last moment of a life she had been living since 1968, and she was not going to rush it. She still watered the perennials every spring, not the vegetables. She had not planted vegetables since, but the perennials Lloyd had put in along the back fence, the coneflowers and the black-eyed Susans. Because they came back on their own, and they didn't ask her permission, and she was not going to be the one who let the things he planted die. This was not a grief she performed. It was a maintenance she performed, and the difference between those two things was the whole of what she had learned in 9 years of being alone. She had 4 children. Pam, the oldest, lived in Nashville, 45 minutes away. She was an accountant and had 3 grown children of her own and a life that was full in the way that lives that are full cannot be interrupted without cost. And she loved her mother in the way that people love mothers when they are confident their mothers are fine. Dennis lived in Atlanta. He had called his mother every Sunday for 11 years, which was a rhythm that had come to function as a substitute for presence. The call was proof of love, and the proof of love meant the presence was not required. Connie in Charlotte, Walt 12 miles away in Smyrna, with the second job and the 3 kids, and the youngest who had been sick since October with one thing and then another. June had long ago decided that Walt had enough, and she was not going to be more of it. She carried this decision the way she carried most of her decisions, quietly, without asking anyone to validate it. She had been to see an attorney in Murfreesboro in November, not in anger, not as a statement. She had simply been doing the arithmetic of her life, and had concluded, with the same clear-eyed precision she had brought to 32 years of 3rd grade assessments, that the distribution she had planned needed to reflect the life as it was rather than the life as she had expected it to be. She had not told her children. There was no reason to tell them. It was her arithmetic to do. The furnace had been running at 58 degrees since mid-October. She had mentioned it once to Dennis on a Sunday call, and he had said he'd look at it next time he was up, and he had not been up since August. She wore an extra cardigan. She had a second cardigan on the hook by the back door for when she needed to go outside. She did not mention the furnace again. There were things in the house that a visitor who paid attention would have seen. The pill organizer on the kitchen counter with the Tuesday and Friday compartments, half filled, because the copay had gone up in September, and the script covered 30 days, and she had been making it cover 42. The single-burner hot plate on the counter beside the stove, because the back left burner had stopped working in October, and she had looked up the repair and decided the part was more than she wanted to spend, and the hot plate was sufficient. The porch railing she had been intending to ask someone to look at, the one that had been loose since November, the one she had been careful around, the one she had been reaching for when the ice took her feet out from under her and the railing had given, and there had been nothing to hold. On the Thursday evening in January, she had made soup, had watched the news, had been in bed by 8:30, because the cold settled into the house by 9, and bed was the warmest place she had. She had gotten up at 9 to take her evening medication and had gone to the back porch to check the latch on the storm door, which had been coming loose. The ice on the boards was invisible in the porch light. One step, and then the boards came out from under her, and she went down onto her right side, wrist and ribs. And the pain was the specific bright pain of things that have broken, not things that might have. She knew the difference. She had Lloyd's ring on the kitchen table. She had her phone in her robe pocket, because she had made herself a rule after Lloyd died. She lay on the ice and took her phone out and looked at the screen for a long moment before she dialed. She called Pam first. Voicemail. She called Dennis. He answered, said he'd call her back in a few minutes. He called back 41 minutes later and said he was sorry. He just couldn't make the drive tonight. He had an early morning, but she should call the neighbor or call 911. She called Connie. Voicemail. She called Walt. Walt said he was coming, said it with the urgency of a man who means it, and called back 19 minutes later to say that Emma had spiked a fever and he couldn't leave her. He was so sorry, Mom. Please call 911. She looked at the phone. She thought about calling 911. She thought about the ambulance coming, and the lights, and the neighbors, and the report, and all the machinery of emergency that would be set in motion over an old woman who had slipped on her porch, and she thought, I don't want to be the thing that interrupted somebody's evening. She did not call 911. She put the phone on her chest and held on. Have you ever known someone who lay on a porch in January and talked themselves out of asking for help because they were afraid of being a burden? If that person is still here, call them tonight after this story ends. If they're not, tell me about them in the comments. They deserve to be remembered. She tried to get up 6 times. Sam would see the evidence of this later. The arc of finger scuff marks on the frost of the porch railing, the half-circle worn into the ice where she had reached and pulled and reached again. 6 attempts. Each one recorded in the frost without her permission, the way the cold records everything. Dove stopped at the edge of the yard. She did not go forward immediately. She turned her head toward the porch with the precise, unhurried attention of a dog that has identified what the night contains and is waiting for the human to confirm the direction. Sam looked where she was looking. The porch light was on. There was a shape on the boards. He was moving before he had finished the thought. He got to her in 11 seconds. She was conscious. Her lips were the color that lips become when the body has been spending its warmth in the cold for too long. The pale, concentrated color of someone managing. She looked at him with the expression of a person who has been alone for 2 hours and 19 minutes and is recalibrating what alone means now that it has changed. Sam said, I've got you. I'm Sam. I live 4 houses down. Don't try to move. She said, I fell. He said, I know. I can see. He was already on the phone with 911. He kept his hand over hers while he talked to the dispatcher. Because she was cold in the specific way that required warmth delivered rather than just described. And because his training had given him a particular clarity about what to do when a person needs to feel that someone is not going to leave. Dove lay down beside June on the icy porch without being told. She put the length of her warmth against June's side. She did not look away from June's face until the ambulance lights came up the driveway. The EMTs said later that June's core temperature was 2 degrees from the threshold. The ER physician said 30 more minutes, and he would be having a different conversation. Sam did not tell June this that night. He told her later, when she was warm and the wrist was set, and the ribs were taped, and she was sitting up in the hospital bed with the particular alertness of a person who has been close to something and knows it. The children arrived between 1 and 2 in the morning. Dennis drove up from Atlanta, which he had said he couldn't do, and had done it in under 4 hours, which told Sam everything about the conversation Dennis had been having with himself in the 41-minute interval before he called back. Pam came. Connie came. Walt came with Emma bundled in the back seat because he was not going to leave his daughter and was not going to not be there, and when Emma asked from the back seat why they were driving at night, he had told her, "Because Grandma June needs us, and that's when you go," and Emma had said okay and gone back to sleep. They came into the room, and Sam was in the chair beside June's bed. He stood when they came in. Dove stood when they came in too. She moved from under the chair to Sam's left side, not aggressively, not with sound, but with the particular positioning of a dog that has spent hours deciding something and is not finished deciding it yet. She looked at each of the children in turn, the amber-eyed attention that was not a threat, but was not neutral either. It was assessment. It was the attention of an animal that had been on that porch and knew what the porch had contained, and was not yet prepared to determine whether the people entering this room had earned a different response than the one the night had already assigned them. Dennis saw the dog first. Then he saw Sam. Sam was a tall man in a worn jacket, and he had been there since before midnight, and his presence was the specific presence of someone who had decided to be somewhere and had not moved from that decision. He introduced himself simply. "Neighbor, 4 houses down," found her on the porch. He did not say anything else. The room understood what he did not say. Dove watched Dennis cross to the bed. She watched him look at his mother, at the wrist in the splint, the taped ribs visible through the hospital gown, the face of a woman who had been on an icy porch for 2 hours and 19 minutes, and when Dennis sat down on the edge of the bed and reached for June's hand, Dove sat down too, which was the only judgment she offered. If you were Dennis, walking into that hospital room at 2 in the morning and seeing that chair, what would you have felt? Type yes or no below if you know exactly what that feeling is. I read every comment. Dennis looked at the chair for a long moment. Then he looked at his mother. June was awake, and she looked at her children. All 4 of them. Walt with Emma half asleep against his shoulder. And then she looked at Sam, and she said, to no one in particular, in the quiet tone of a woman who has been doing the arithmetic for a long time and has just arrived at a number she did not expect, "I didn't want to be the thing that interrupted somebody's evening." The room was quiet. Dove was under Sam's chair. She did not move. Dennis sat down on the edge of the bed. He took his mother's unbroken hand. He did not say anything for a while. When he did speak, he said her name, just her name, in the way that people say names when they mean something that is too large for other words, and June let him hold her hand. And the room did the work that rooms do when something has been broken and the people in it have not yet figured out how to begin the repair, but have at least stopped pretending the break isn't there. Sam stayed until 4 in the morning. June had not asked him to. He had simply not left, because leaving would have meant going back to a house 4 doors down, where a woman had lain on an icy porch for 2 hours and 19 minutes and called 4 people and heard 3 voicemails and 2 apologies, and that was not a thing Sam Greer was going to leave without being sure it was behind her. When he finally got up to go, June reached for his hand with her unbroken one. She held it for a moment. She looked at him the way she had looked at 32 years of third graders, when they finally understood something they had been working at. Not with relief, with recognition. "How did you come to be in Cedar Hill?" she asked. He told her about Ray Cobb, about Murfreesboro, about Dottie. He told her about the first Sunday in May, and the first Sunday in October, and the sweet tea on the porch. June looked at him for a moment and then said, "Dottie Cobb." "I know Dottie Cobb. We sang together at First Baptist for 20 years. And something in the room shifted. The specific shift that happens when two separate griefs discover they share a name, and the sharing makes them less separate. She had been worth the interruption the whole time. Pastor Thomas was at First Baptist on Sunday and told the congregation what had happened. Because June had given him permission, and because June had sung in the choir for 31 years, and this was her community, and they had a right to know that she had needed them on a Thursday and had not been reached. The visitation committee organized a meal rotation and a Thursday evening check-in call. Neither of these things stopped when June came home. Pam drove up from Nashville on the following Saturday with a contractor and had the furnace fixed before noon. She stayed the weekend. On Sunday morning, she sat in the sunroom where the cold light came in through the south windows, and she drank coffee, and she looked at her mother's house, the specific house of a specific woman. The cardigan on the hook by the door, the perennials that would come back in spring along the back fence, the chair by the window where her mother sat in the evenings. And she understood that she had been looking at a photograph of this house for years and had stopped seeing the house itself. Dennis called his mother every Sunday still, and still would. But he started calling on Thursdays too. Not at a scheduled time, just when the week was done and the thought arrived, and he let the thought complete itself instead of filing it away for the weekend. Sam came by on Tuesdays. Not every Tuesday, but most of them. June had started making an extra portion of whatever she was cooking on Tuesday afternoons, not because she expected him, but because he usually came, and she was not going to be underprepared. Dove slept in the strip of sunlight inside the back door when they visited, in the exact place where the porch boards met the kitchen threshold, as though she had decided the boundary between outside and inside was the right place for her particular kind of attention. The will, as it turned out, was revised again in February. June did not discuss this with her children. She did her arithmetic, and she adjusted the figures, and she felt, when she was done, that the numbers were honest, and that honesty was the best she could do. Some things you carry alone because they are yours to carry, and no one else can hold the weight of them correctly. This was one of those things, and June had never needed anyone to tell her the difference. There are people in every town who are lying on their porch deciding whether they are worth the interruption. Not because no one loves them, because the people who love them have organized their lives so that love is something they feel rather than something they do at 11:30 on a Thursday when the temperature is dropping and a phone keeps going to voicemail. The love is real. The porch is also real. Both things are true, and only one of them can be fixed in the time available. She had been worth the interruption the whole time. This story is for every person who talked themselves out of the call because they were afraid of being too much. You were never too much. And for everyone who has been 4 houses away and didn't know, sometimes the dog knows before you do. Let her lead. Is there a June in your life? Someone you've been meaning to check on? Not next weekend, today? Tell me about them in the comments. Let's fill this section with the names of people who are worth the interruption. Every story on this channel is about choosing not to look away. If that means something to you, subscribe so you're here for the next one. Which moment in this story stayed with you? I'll see you in the comments.